After the 60s, it transferred over to Thailand, and they took up the ball, and that's where most of the hybrids are being done now. Most of the crops of Vandas are grown. But so then species and hybrids, and then if you hear the term primary hybrid, that's two species put together. And just as a little aside, almost always when you put two together, you're going to get a bit stronger plant. It's called hybrid vigor. So for the average person to enjoy them, you don't need to know that. But it's kind of fun to know it in case you want to know the background of your plant. And these days with the internet, oh, you can look up anything. And you don't always want to believe everything you read, but for the most part, if you Google a type of a orchid, in this case, you're going to get a lot of information about it. So it's really a great time to be plugged in for knowledge. And I have to put a plug in for the American Orchid Society too. They have a great web page. I don't believe you have to be a member to look at their web page, but super good resource. You can join, I can't remember what it costs, but you can join and get only online magazines, so it's much less money than if they mail it to you. Great magazine though too, and just a super, super good resource. So I always try and mention them. And the society gets has a membership with them too, and they have magazines. And if you ever would want to see one, you can request. I don't know who keeps those. Larry, do you keep those? But you can request to see them to see if you'd like to join. But check out the website. So this is a typical Vanda. Now, Vandas differ from Cattleyas, Oncidiums. These are all the different genuses. The main genuses are, we know, Cattleyas, Oncidiums, Dendrobiums. Vandas have. I was going to say, move back to the flowers against the white instead of the brown. Show up better. Okay. I'll try and remember that. Most of the time, I'm going to be showing you the foliage, but this is what I want to show you. And by the way, too, the opportunity table, the tickets that you buy, the blue tickets, all of those plants on there are to win. And there are two of these on that same table. And there are two of these red ones on the table too. And then a variety of others. Just so you know, I think there's still time to buy some tickets before the end of the meeting. So a typical Vanda is, this exemplifies it. Strap leaves, monopodial growth, we call it. Cattleyas, Oncidiums, they grow in a line like this, but Vandas grow upward, up, up, up. They just keep putting new fans out. Yeah, no, I asked him to do this. Yeah, okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Okay, so strap leaves. If you see a plant that has thick leaves going out in a fan shape, it's most likely a Vanda. But we have different types of Vandas too. This is called a Tourette leaf Vanda. Tourette meaning like pencil thin. And you can see how different it is. And these are the ones that they used to grow commercially. Yeah, Miss Joaquin, they Joachim, whatever you call it. Yeah, this is, and it's very different than the strap leaf kind, but still in the Vanda family. This is called, well, I'm going to throw some names out now. It was Vanda, but now it's Papilionanthe. Vanda Tourette style is what these leaves mean. Yeah. This one, Vanda. And actually, you guys, let's just call them Vandas. They're being reclassified. Like this one is same, right? Completely different size-wise. Still yet, if you look in there, each one is a little fan. And this forever was called Neophanetia falcata. It's a lovely, fragrant wind orchid, they also call it. It grows naturally in Japan, Taiwan. But nowadays they call this, they did the DNA sequencing, this is a Vanda as well. So it's okay, we'll just call them all Vandas. But there's also a few other families still in the Vanda family. Arides still looks really similar. The leaves are a little bit wider, not quite so stiff, I guess you could say. That's Arides. And Rhinecone stylus. Did I have this one here? Rhinecone stylus are Rhinecone stylus have sort of lines in the leaves. You can usually tell, but it's same growth habit, super gnarly roots. This one blooms from down below into an arching, gorgeous thing, fragrant. So that's, and then there's Rhinantheras, there's Ascocentrums, which there's a couple Ascocentrums, that's a smaller plant. And there's Trichocentrums, Trichoglottis. Anyway, if you want to know, you can tell. This looks more like Phalaenopsis. Yeah, you're gonna, maybe some people might mistake them. And actually Phalaenopsis, if you go back in the family of plants, does come from the Vandalliance. So that's the same way that that grows. So let's just call them Vandas for now, okay? So what do you see when you see a plant? The first thing you see, of course, are the flowers. And they're gorgeous. They are candy colors, I call it. If you can see the different ones I brought, this is just a few that I happen to have in bloom. I didn't really have many in bloom to bring you to show you examples. Like I said, that's another talk. We can show slides and show you all the gorgeous, big, beautiful ones. But candy colors, you see the flowers first, then you notice that foliage. And then you also can't help but notice the roots. And roots are very important in Vandas, and they are usually rather aggressive, as you can tell. In Thailand, they almost always grow them in baskets. They'll even put them in this tiny basket, but they'll have plants like this growing in there. And the roots will just be like this, but all coming out of the basket. And they have a method of growing. They're warm over there. For the most part, Thailand's very warm in the daytime. So they water them. They just are, the roots have no media inside, and they're just exposed to the air, and they grow like mad.
Just going to bring it down a little because they're getting the ceiling lights.
Great. Yeah, that's better. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So once again, you want to, this is really important too when you're talking about how to grow something, is to really look at what you've got. You know, I think most of you now, I'm going to say, can tell a Vanda now from a Cattleya. But look at it really closely. Look and see, where do the roots start from? How do the roots look? Some of these are kind of looking kind of dead. They don't need those roots in there if they're dead. But really check out the shape of the leaf. If the leaf is flat, that's going to absorb a lot more of the sunlight, right? Got a flat leaf. But many kinds of Vandas, like this one and this big one, they have cupped leaves. They're very cupped. Well, that means that they can take really bright light. So when you're observing a plant, just think in those terms. Does it have a hard leaf? Hard leaf almost always signifies that it can take good light. Or is it a softer leaf like this one? Arides tend to like it a little more shady. I figured out over time. But you can see the difference in the leaves, quite a bit of difference. So really look at it. Look at the roots. They're almost always outrageous, but are they really, really thick? A thick root can absorb a lot of water. It can absorb a lot of water. If it's a thinner root, well, it's not going to stay wet as long, right? So whenever doesn't matter if it's a Vanda or a Cattleya or Oncidium, if you check out the roots. Roots are one of the most important part of orchids. And just to know, okay, if it's a big, thick root, then you're going to water it a little more often. You're going to watch how much that absorbs. So obviously, they're really aggressive in Vandas. And you're probably, yes, yes.
And so it's green all the time, and it's a fall. But now the roots that are coming out are much smaller. And almost like the cold.
Okay, she has a plant, a Vanda, that had big, thick roots when she bought it. She hung it up in Pahoa where it's getting rained on. And now the roots are wanting to grow sort of out and up.
They're thinner, heavier, and they're going out and up.
Okay, yes, it probably means that, is it in a root ball or does it have any media at all?
Not in any,
It's on the side of a tree.
it's, well, maybe not the tree,
Yeah.
yeah.
If it's hanging in the tree with no root ball is this the one you said that the roots were really long? Oh, it's probably still trying to find that tree to grab onto. So I wouldn't worry about it because when you bought that, most likely it was grown in a greenhouse condition with the best fertilizer and probably didn't get too much water, just the right amount of water. And so sometimes it's hard, you guys, when you buy a plant from a grower and you take it to your own home conditions. Please don't get discouraged because commercial growers, I'm a small commercial grower, but I hate to say, but we spray the plants. We've got to in order to keep them healthy in the greenhouse. We put fungicide on, we put pesticides on it. It's the worst part of growing orchids, I admit. And I don't recommend that any of you home growers use any of that stuff. What you do is you do your best culture of the plant by observing what you have and you can use some home remedies if you get certain pests. But for the most part, if it's not growing very well, then you know what? Let it go and come get another one. I mean, we happen to live, and this is another thing that's so important about our area here. We have the prime area for growing orchids. I mean, outside. So
Sometimes moving it to a different area.
yes, and Gloria said it perfectly. Sometimes if it's not doing too good in one area, well, move it to another area. Observe it. So let me continue on with, once you look at your plant, you see what kind of roots it has, what kind of foliage it has, then you try and experiment where to put it. You're going to guess that it needs really bright light. So if it's not doing well, put it in a little less light and just observe it to see. Now, all the time that I've been growing, and I've been growing Vandas now for quite a while, many, many years. And I love them so much that I decided I'll do that commercially, right? Well, years later, I bet I've made no money on the things because they're very difficult to get good ones that bloom all the time. And there are ones out there that bloom all the time, but they're also difficult to know exactly what they like because all you hear about is how bright Vandas love it. They love it dry, they love it bright. Well, I fixed an area on the south side of my greenhouse and it gets sun in the winter and the sun and the summer. It's just bright, bright, bright. And you know what? They liked it better in the greenhouse next to it that was a little shadier. So, but you may try yours in a bright area and it does very well for you. So it's kind of funny when you have somebody tell you how to grow something because I can only tell you best how I can grow it. And that may change all the time too. Once you move it around, find an area for it. But everybody has this issue too. But I tell you, please do not get discouraged if you buy a really nice plant from someone and you take it home. and it, after a while, doesn't look quite so good. But there are plants that will do very well for you without the pesticides, without the extra fertilizers, without all that. So please don't be discouraged and keep trying. But once you have a feel for your plant, find the light that's the best kind of light is bright in the day, in the morning time or afternoon. And then as the sun comes up, there's dappled lighting over it. Think about like the light under a plumeria tree. I always use that as an analogy because they love that kind of dappled bright light. And then as it goes down in the late afternoon, it can get some good light again. So orchids tend to love that kind of environment. Tom's going to give a talk. Oh, it's on a Orchid Digest. They're having a conference, and one of them is to observe the growing areas of these plants to better know how to grow them. Well, we happen to have, like I say, some of the best area to grow plants. So if you see something somewhere that's growing very well, note how much light it has, how much air it has, how much, where it's growing. Is it in volcano? Is it in Hilo? You've got to be the best grower of orchids by observing. So I can't stress that enough. So Vandas, you can see them around Hilo quite a bit. They're up in a monkey pod tree have you ever seen that monkey pod tree that's in St. Joe's, the school, St. Joe's off of Kimmerle Street? There's a monkey pod, just if you happen to be at the stoplight, look up. It's huge. It's just spread all in. And it's kind of dark in there. And yet it's been there for so long that it's established itself and it blooms too. I happened to see it in bloom one time. I wondered if it would ever. So, you see, okay, so up high in a tree, that dappled kind of light, think about that for when you're looking in your garden. I'm going to jump back and say that you're going to go, well, why do I put them in pots if they grow so well out, in a basket? It's because customers said, what am I going to do with all these roots? Can't you put them in a pot? So all these years I've been trying that too, and some of them do fine like this, and some of them not so great. So you again need to try different things to see what will work. So the roots, let's go back to the roots.
Karen, when you say basket, you mean a literal plastic basket or one of the wooden baskets?
Yeah. So she's asked about the different baskets, and I brought a few samples here just to show you. This is a wooden slat basket, and I don't know how often you see these for sale now, but this is a great environment for an orchid. Unless it's raining all the time. If you live upper Hilo, Waikea-Uka, where it rains all the time, this is probably going to hold too much water for you. That's when a plastic basket would be better because it would let it drain out more without holding so much moisture. So Vandas, in nature, they grow up in the tree. The roots cling to the tree. They run up and down it. They get good air circulation. And even if it doesn't rain, because a lot of these will go through dry parts of the year, those roots are clinging to the trees and they're getting moisture out of the dew at night. So that's really important too. You're going to hear things about, oh, this orchid likes it really, really dry. Well, don't be fooled. If you think about it, almost every dry area has quite a bit of moisture at night. So if we go through a couple weeks time when it doesn't rain and your plant is outside, I wouldn't worry about it. You might go with your hose and do it, but for the most part, if they've got good roots established, they're going to be fine. And that's what these are all about. Whether it's this type of an orchid or this type, those roots are out there looking to cling to something. They're not parasitic. They don't cling to a tree and take from the tree. They call it epiphytic, where they use that tree as a host. So you never have to worry about strangling any tree that you might put them on. But those roots, if you put this on a tree, It's amazing. In a couple months' time, almost always, you'll see those roots start. And if in a few months' time, they're already clinging to that tree. So they are tenacious. And so even though I've got them in pots, I highly recommend, okay, I highly recommend you folks find a tree. A money tree is great, except that money trees grow so fast that you probably have to cut them at some point, but they love money trees. They love plumerias.
And here,
And ohias are great. I've seen Vandas growing ohias that naturalized there. They made a seed pod and the pod blew it. And these were like younger ohias, not full on. This was in Paradise Park. And they blew up into the trees and you looked up and it's like, oh my God, there's tons of Vandas up there. So, you know, that's what they naturally like. Anyway,
what about a noni?
no, noni, she asked about a noni tree. They grow so fast and they're soft, the softwood. So unless it's been there a long time, I wouldn't recommend that because they just grow too fast unless you're constantly trimming it. Tea plants can work, but because they make a lot of crotches that orchids can rest in. But again, they grow really fast too, so you may need to be out there trimming the tea. But I've had them grow orchids growing in them, and they're happy as can be. I've seen them in citrus trees. Yeah, in citrus. I've even seen them in avocados, even though some things don't like avocados. Like you're not supposed to feed animals leaves from an avocado, but the plants seem to do pretty well. So
And they do good on mango.
they can do good on a mango. Just be careful that you don't get it where it gets too dark underneath.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, you've got to be really careful on mango that you get the sap on you. It can really burn. Oh yeah, yeah. Some people are just terribly allergic to it. Other people just get that sap on your arm and it can burn. So be careful with certain trees like mango.
What about a palm tree?
And what about a palm tree? I've seen them grow great on palm trees. If you're in a super dry area, it might be a little too dry for them to cling. Palm trees that have a little more roughness to them, like a coconut's awfully slick, and they will cling there. But at my place, it was dry for a while, and the ones I had established, they weren't happy at all. In fact, they died because it wasn't enough to hold it. But there's certain palms. What are those that they're an Alexander palm that has some kind of and they have some kind of texture on the bark, and that's what the orchids love to cling to. So think about that when you're trying to find a place. But palms are great because they're very, very bright, but in the middle of the day, they have really good shade, and then they're bright. So that's what an orchid likes too. Remember that. Yes.
I would just comment that putting orchids on a self-cleaning palm tree is a bad idea.
Oh,
Because when the fronds clean themselves and they fall down, often they'll fall right down and just rip the orchids right off.
yeah. Glenn was pointing out that on a palms that lose their leaves, the heavy kind of leaves, it can just rip the orchids out of there as they're falling. So I think Alexanders are quite a little bit smaller, right? They don't drop as many leaves. Is that correct? Yeah, I don't really know them myself, but Phoenix palms are good too,
Yeah.
but you've got to be careful of the spines. They're terribly spiny. But think in those terms. Hapu can be really good. Yeah, hapu is great, but the only thing is hapu tends to grow where it's awfully wet. So you have to judge for Vandas whether that's the best thing. Dendrobium, Oncidium, even a lot of Cattleya, they love hapu, but for Vandas may not be your best choice. So once you find your support, then try and imagine how the lighting is going to be, feel the air movement. You'll know your temperature because unless you're up at volcano, most of the Vandas are going to do very well. Glenn, I guess, it says at 2,300 feet in Glenwood area, and he grows the Vanda cerulean to perfection. That's the one that comes naturally from northern Thailand. And so, though to me, his place is frigidly cold, that Vanda loves it there. But I tell you, once they start hybridizing these things, they're much more adaptable. So any kind of Vanda cerulean hybrid, even if Vanda cerulean is one parent, they can come down to my place and be really happy. So just all you folks who live in Hilo area, you know that most of the Vanda hybrids will do just fine for you. A Vanda cerulean straight one may not bloom though. Yes.
I have a couple of Vandas growing in small pots. And their roots are 4 feet long already.
Yeah.
So what does one do?
Okay, so she says she has smaller plants. How big? Like this big? Yeah, 8-inch plants or so, 10-inch plants with roots that are already 4 feet long. Well, there's not much you can do with that except put it on a tree. And and you don't have trees. Well, and one of the advantages of putting in baskets or in pots, but in baskets, is that you can bring it in the house when they bloom and you can enjoy them in the house. So that's one reason to encourage you to try it this way.
So can we trim those?
Okay, so can you trim them? Yeah, you can. I would flame my shears before trimming them. Flame them, meaning give them a good hot flame to wear the metal for a good 20 seconds anyway, and so that you don't pass disease on through the roots. But yes, I have a hanging area and where the roots are coming down, and then we get inspected in order to ship to the mainland. And yes, so every year or so I'd have to go and cut those roots, and they actually loved it. It made more roots come out the top. Now, if you have a really old established Vanda, I mean like really old established, and you went and cut all the roots, I would be a little careful with that because that may cause it to shock. But I mean, I'm talking about in a really established old ones. But a young one like that, for sure, you can cut them. I mean, when I go to pot them into pots, I pretty much have to just coax them in there because they don't want to be in a pot. They want to be on a tree. And whenever you folks see them growing anywhere, if you ever go to Akaka Falls, there's ones growing in the trees there. All over Hilo, you'll see them growing. And you'll see those roots just going everywhere because that's their lifeline, is getting those roots out, and that's how they get their nourishment. That's how they get the water. And so you want to think in those terms. Now, if it's just hanging down, well, they do okay like that too. They can. But in my experience, and this is my experience, they really like the trees better. And I've tried certain plants do great like this, and certain plants, they are just not very happy at all. So again, you need to experiment a little bit. Yeah.
And it's really the only reason to put them in a basket is for people who are going to be selling them, and you have to carry them and they're all over again. It's a very big truck for any plant right there. So, but if you're in your own home, and then there's people who want to bring it in when it's flowering, so there's that. But for the growth of the plant and the flowering of it, help overall, they would rather just be on trees.
Yes, she said yes. And let's reiterate that we put them in baskets or pots so that we can enjoy them and move them around. But for the most part, if you take a plant that's relatively happy like this and you put it on a tree in our environment, I'm not talking about volcano, but I'm talking about where most of us live from here up to Mountain View, it'll love you for it. So I highly recommend that you, like, if you win some opportunity plants, you can see the roots are all over the place. And it is kind of a pain to deal with them. But if you can put it on a tree, otherwise, then you can try a pot or a basket. The roots are nice. Yeah, some people love them for the roots. So let me just show you, I just brought this to show you, this is an ohia, and you see how textured the roots are. I mean, excuse me, the bark is. That's what the orchids love to be in. So if you have an ohia sitting here with a nice crotch in it, well, that's how you put your plant. You just set the plant in there. And you always look up here because the roots come out as it grows up too. The old roots are on the bottom. This is the bottom of the plant. This is the top of the plant as it's growing up. So the roots come out as it's growing this way. So if you're going to put it against a tree, you're going to want to put it where those new roots are going to have their first opportunity to cling to it, like up against the tree like that. Or in this case, if you have a nice crotch, you can just set it in the crotch. Doesn't really matter which direction because it'll find its way up with the sunlight and all that. And you can strap it down. The main thing is to keep it so it does not move around. Because once those roots start coming, and they'll start coming in an amazingly short period of time. If you're watering it with the hose and you come and hit it and it's moving around, it's not going to allow those roots to grab on. So you want to make sure it's just clinging. You can use something like twist tie just to hold it in place. And just make sure it's not going to move around when it gets the wind or the rain or the hose hitting it. And then before long, that's going to cling onto this and use this as the host, and they grow really great that way. If you want to use a, yes, somebody, yes.
Comment about not having any trees. When I lived at HPP, like now, I had no trees in my yard whatsoever. But a neighbor was getting rid of some ohia trees. And so what I did is I brought them to my house and I put them together and made a stand like a potting stand out of it.
Wonderful.
And anyway, I put the Vandas on and they were all ohias were all branches and stuff, so that was part of the look. Anyway, and I put the Vandas on there, and they loved it. They do really well.
Wonderful.
And bloomed.
So she made her own mounts, brought them to her land, and made ohia. How did you get them to stand up?
Well, I made like a potting bench
Oh.
out of them,
Uh-huh.
and I screwed it together with my screwdriver.
Oh, that's
and
great.
my drill.
Can you hear that? Oh, she used screws to screw this together. She made a bench out of these ohia. This was ohia from her neighbor's yard, and made it where they were branching, and so made it a whole area where she could just mount the Vandas right on this sort of living bench. I love that idea. That's a great idea because she had no trees in her yard to start with. And that's I know a lot of people don't have enough trees. Yeah, Tom. Oh, okay. Someone else asked about pruning the Vandas roots. I wouldn't do it unless you need to because you're going to repot it or you're going to move it. When to do it, it doesn't really matter when you do it as far as during the year goes. I mean, theoretically, it'd be better when it was drier outside, so there'd be less chance of disease to come into the roots once you've cut them. But the main thing is to sterilize your shears when you cut them, so you don't introduce any bacteria or fungus inadvertently. But as far as when to do it, no, it doesn't really matter. If they get 4 feet long and you have a 10-inch plant, then you can, I wouldn't do it drastically, but you could take a foot or two off of that. Did that answer that? Yep. So in a basket, if you're going to, I mean, it's pretty obvious if you have a basket. For a plant this size, I probably wouldn't put this into anything larger than this. Because once you put it in, the roots are going to start finding their way out of here anyway. So say you put it in here and then you hang it on a hanger. like these are. That's going to be really happy. Now, I didn't bring any media to show you, but we buy these larger chunks of fir bark, and I think you can get them at Walmart. I'm not positive, but that they call it a landscape bark.
Yeah.
They love, almost all orchids, by the way, love chunky, bigger pieces of media. If you use potting soil in almost any orchid, they're not going to be happy at all. You want aerated material, chunks of bark, big chunks of cinder. You can even use gravel if, as long as it's larger size. You're always going to have better growth using more chunky media. Over the years, for me growing, I've just gotten used larger and larger media. So when I put a band in here, depending on how you're going to water it. Now, yes.
I have also used recycled bark.
Yes.
Wine.
Wine corks are great media. Rinse them off because the tannins may or may not bother them, but wine corks are wonderful. So use your innovation. Yeah, of course you have to have wine too, yeah. Yeah. A styrofoam can work, or the packing peanuts, as much as I hate those things, as much as I hate them, and I hope I don't go to hell for using them, but they work really well for aerating the bottom of your pots, whatever kind, they work really well. Just be careful they're not blowing all over your yard. That's what I hate about those things, but they work really well. So you can be innovative. Yeah, there's a lot of the wine these days have more of a plastic cork in them. They can work. They're not going to be quite as happy because they're more slick than real cork, but they can work because it's a chunky aerated media, especially for Vandas, especially. But I wouldn't even depending on where you're going to be. If you live in Kona, where the breeze is blowing all the time and it's hot and the breeze is blowing and it doesn't rain that much, you would want to put some media in here just to help it stay moist. But around Hilo, you can either leave it empty if it's going to rain all the time, or what I do, because in my greenhouse I water, right? They don't get rained on, so I control the watering. So I'll put just on one side, so it has lots of aeration out of one side, but one side has an area where it can kind of cling to get going. So that's another way to do it. Yes.
One last persnickety question about baskets. Some of these roots are like a quarter an inch, third of an inch thick.
Yeah.
They are not going to go through those snacks.
Well, you'd be surprised. They would. Yeah.
Like the small ones go through, but the big ones, they want to make big ones, they're just taking up all the time.
Yeah, and sometimes they force their way through. On the Franklin Stylus, they have super aggressive, thick roots. They're scary. I mean, if you let them go in your greenhouse, they'll get on the bench and you can hardly pry those things off. So that's one thing about putting them in a basket too, is that they're not going to, take over your green, or your benches if you have even outside benches. So just have to be careful of that. So a lot of people ask me about fertilizing. I say if they're out in nature on a tree where they get the right amount of sunlight, the right amount of air, circulation, temperature, they really don't need to be fed. Now, if you have them in your yard and you want to give them a little boost, that's a good thing too. And I use like a 13-13-13 type of orchid fertilizer that has calcium in it. That's a really good general fertilizer. People ask, can you use regular fertilizer? You can, like a Miracle-Gro, but that's formulated for like vegetables and flowering plants. So if you're going to use that on orchids, you got to dilute it, quarter strength at the most. And then if you want to water with your fertilizer, say they're on your trees in your yard and you have a little backpack sprayer or something that you can hose end sprayer, you can add your fertilizer like that, and they'll like that. It's not totally necessary, but they will appreciate some fertilizer. Yes.
I think it might have been Tom Menenda who told me that you should be careful about the form of nitrogen, that it should not be urea, it should be something else.
Yeah.
That's why specifically for orchids, go.
Yeah, so specifically for orchids, they don't use, what did you call it?
I think urea.
Urea kind of nitrogen in the fertilizer.
Terrified.
Yeah, and that's kind of for another, that could be a whole subject in itself. But it's true, they found that that is not as good for orchids. But I'm of the mind of simple, make it simple. You can go to Garden Exchange and they'll sell small amounts of water soluble fertilizer. They'll also sell you those pellets, they're gray pellets of time release.
Yeah.
Those are great. You can get a little cheesecloth bag or a little baggie, put it in there and put it on your Vanda. You know, we can sprinkle that on most orchids and it's a time release thing, but on Vandas with no media, it might fall the way through, but you can put a little bag of that, a tea bag or whatever on there. So that's something, and you can buy smaller amounts at a place like Garden Exchange. But fertilizer is kind of secondary to everything else. It's not going to help a plant that's not happy otherwise. And then diseases and pests. Well, if it rains all the time, a Vanda is not going to be very happy. You might get spots on the leaves. It doesn't mean the plant will die necessarily, but you may get fungus, you may get bacteria. The only thing I say to use is if it's a wet bacteria, use cinnamon. Cinnamon is a great antibacterial. That'll help dry it out. If it's bacteria, you can use alcohol. It can help arrest any kind of growth that goes on. 70%, not stronger than 70%. And then for pests, the biggest trouble with Vandas and pests are thrips. Thrips started coming around a few years ago. They weren't much around until, I mean, I'm sure they were before, but they hadn't been around for a while. Then they start coming around and it's a real drag because they get into those buds as they're forming. They'll go into the bud and eat away at it so that when it opens, it's all crippled, yeah, or it's scarred up. And I bet a lot of you have seen that in your Vandas. And the only way to control that, and they are easy to kill. You can kill them with regular dish soap, but you have to do it like every week at the least, because those things, their life cycle, and then the fact that they get inside the buds. So if you have a Vanda you love and you can actually see these with your naked eye too, or at least with your glasses on. Yeah, and then you can get on there spraying with this soap once a week. Yes, Dana.
I've heard also that to keep your orchids away from gardenias and bushes like yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The ones that are like
It makes sense.
thrips.
Yeah, makes sense. Those are thrip magnets. Yeah, and you might get certain Vandas that are magnets to thrips. No reason why, but they'll get one that'll get chewed, and you may have another one that doesn't get chewed. So, I mean, Rick, do you see those very much at your place? Yeah, even at Rick's place. If you ever get a chance to go on a nursery tour, if you haven't already, Rick grows the heck out of the Vandas, and he's at what elevation are you? 700 feet. You don't have to be Hilo level. He does a great job of it, and they love his ohia trees. Mostly they're on. Yes, Tom? Yeah. Yes, I've seen it. The designers decided that they thought it was a fun thing to put a Vanda with the roots inside of a glass vase. And you think that's going to be happy? No. I mean, you can do it, and it's all for the show of the roots in there. But hey, we live in Hawaii. Why would you want to do that?
And you
Yeah.
know, they're not getting air circulation.
And they're not getting air circulation. Exactly. It doesn't make sense. So just think again about what you're looking at, what the roots are like. Even in a small one like this, I have it in this very, very chunky. And it took me years to figure out to put them in chunky media. I have just big chunks sitting in there, and the roots have very much air to them. And these get watered. They're in a greenhouse, yes, but they get watered every few days. So try and think how fast it's going to drain, how much it stays wet. If you're going to have them outside where they get rained on, a basket is way better than a pot. And then just one other thing, when you do actually gets successful and the plant, oh my gosh, you have a spike coming, don't move it around. Like if your spike's coming and it's this long and you move it over here, that spike doesn't know where to go. They're real directional. So in fact, they really seem to like where the light is. So like to the south this time of year, that's where the sun is. They'll probably present the best if you have the plant, situated looking south. I mean, you don't have to do that, but just don't, if it's started already, if you move it around, you may get a wonky stem. And again, if you get something from the opportunity table that you don't know what it is, it might say Ascocentrum curvifolium. Look it up on the internet. Google it. I mean, I swear you get to learn so much about it. So I mean, most of them are labeled with what color they are, but a few of them I didn't label because they're species and it's hard to describe them, but you can look them up. So I hope everybody, you still have time to buy some tickets if you want. All of those are for the opportunity table and these as well here. So any more questions? Yes, Jeff?
A comment about the shape of the leaves of that they have a distinctive shape, which doesn't come to a point or a low. Too low, that one is always
Wonders of nature, no idea why. But you're right, they're almost always like that. You see how it's not a real smooth edge? Yeah. Yes.
Do they bloom, up the stem, do they bloom?
Almost all Vandas bloom, they'll go up. They hardly ever will bloom lower again, but they'll just climb up as they go and come out like this as they go. Yes. Okay, every Vanda is different. Some only bloom once a year. Some like this bloom randomly throughout the year. Boy, if I'd had that one figured out, I would have been rich by now. But I tell you, I've been growing some of these things for 8 years, and it's like, but I bet if one of you takes this home, I wouldn't be surprised if taking it out of my environment just gets it to bloom. So I challenge you, if you get these to bloom, tell me, because some of them I've been waiting and it doesn't, it sometimes just like Gloria said at the beginning, moving them to a new place just wakes them up. No idea why, that's just the experience I've had. All right, any other questions? All right, well, great, thanks guys. Yeah, happy growing.